All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Botany Bistro, where we specialize in bite-sized botany for you to take a little bit and chew on, and hopefully get some great ideas on how you can use botany in your life and maybe some future research that you want to do. And so today is our 18th session. I can't believe it. This was just an idea a few months ago, and now it's turned into quite the project. And I'm very proud of the work that we've all done together. And so today we are picking up on our Paleobotany theme. This is part 2. We recorded part 1 2 weeks ago. And so if you missed that session, please feel free to catch up. We have all of our videos archived on our website, and they're also on our YouTube channel. So just a little bit about our series, if it's your first time. My name's Mary Dudley, and I'm the Ecology Education Manager here at the Civic Garden Center. We're located in Avondale in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we've been here for 80 years teaching people about gardening and how they can use plants in their lives. And so this session is going to be really neat. I was happy to do the research for our previous session, but found that my expertise is limited in the field of paleobotany. It's okay not to be good at everything. And so I really needed some help with this session. And thankfully we have a wonderful guest. Dr. Ryberg is here with us. And so we'll be listening to their presentation in just a little bit. But let's recap. What have we already learned about on the Bistro? We've talked about plant breeding and genetics, plant morphology, pathology, physiology, systematics, anatomy, and we are going to keep going with ethnobotany, and we will also be talking about biotechnologies, all these different parts of botany. Botany is a very wide field, and there's lots of different things to get involved in. So make sure that you are, keeping that curiosity going, and we always need new people to contribute to the field. So I really think that this is going to be some good info for us today. I always have a little snack with me on the Bistro because it's lunchtime. And so today I've got this wonderful chicken with some rice and some carrots, and our theme and my food usually go together. Last week, I actually forgot to tell everybody why I had brought that soup. And so it was kind of the concept of, you're kind of looking in the soup, so to speak. What are paleobotanists finding when they are at these sites? What are they uncovering? What are they looking for? And really being able to sort through all of the different pieces that they're finding and putting those pieces like a puzzle together. And so I find that to be very fascinating. So that was the story with the soup. Today, my husband helped contribute to the chicken idea. He did make the chicken. It is going to be quite tasty, I'm sure. But I was like, I'm talking about paleobotany tomorrow. What should I bring for lunch? And we had this in the fridge, and he's like, well, dinosaurs, chicken, there you go. And it took me a minute, but it was a neat connection to think of, the evolution and the hypothesis that understanding of how that has worked, to think that some of our modern birds might be descendants from some of those larger creatures that roamed the earth. And so that will put us into our guest speaker, and I'm going to introduce Dr. Ryberg. And Dr. Ryberg and I, while we have never met in person, I found while talking to her on the phone that I've actually seen her before. And so recently at our Omnimax at the Cincinnati Museum Center, they were hosting Dinosaurs of Antarctica. And so I watched this beautiful, amazing Omnimax movie, and our speaker was one of the researchers, one of the scientists in that movie. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Ryberg now. Just to let you know, Our little bit of homework as we have it over the next couple of weeks until our next session together is to tell us about your favorite fossil. You can share that on social media with us, and we're happy to kind of explore new things that we like together. So if you want to post that and let us know. And so I'm going to introduce Dr. Ryberg, who's a paleobotanist and can speak on this much more intelligently than I can. Right now, she is Associate Professor of Biology in the Honors Academy, Director at Park University, which is in Parkville, Missouri, if anybody wants to go on a road trip. And although she was on a pre-med career track as an undergraduate student, Dr. Ryberg found her passion for paleobotany on a biology class field trip in Nebraska, where on an excursion to find fossil shark teeth, she also discovered fossil plants. She realized that field research would allow her to travel and spend time outside, discovering plants that are totally unlike anything that exists today. Dr. Ryberg's bachelor's degrees are in biological sciences and history from the University of Nebraska, and she completed her doctoral degree in botany at the University of Kansas. Dr. Ryberg specializes in studying Glossopteris, and you can correct me, Dr. Ryberg, if I said that wrong, which is an extinct plant species from about 260 million years ago. That's million. She's especially interested in ecology and the evolution of plant life at high latitudes, and what the ancient past might signal about the future. Her work has taken her on research adventures around the world, from South Africa to Australia to Antarctica. So I'm very excited about our chat today. Thank you, Dr. Ryberg, so much for coming to, rainy Cincinnati today.
I'm a paleobotanist, and I like to tell people that paleontologists are puzzle solvers. We love to find the different pieces of the puzzle. The biggest problem is we don't know what the puzzle looks like. So while you guys have the picture on the front of the box of the puzzle, we have no idea what the puzzle looks like. And now why everyone focuses on the dinosaur pieces of the puzzle, you'll never get a complete puzzle without the plants. Because without plants, you don't have dinosaurs and you don't have animals. So plants are very, very important. Now, in the previous paleobotany talk, you talked about several of the different types of fossils that you can find out there. But one of the ones, the rarest one they didn't quite talk about, is something called permineralization. So what it does is it takes petrified specimens to the next level. And it still has the anatomy and the actual cellular detail structure still preserved. So we can actually figure out the internal structure of a lot of the fossils that were around hundreds of millions of years ago. And one thing that many people don't realize is that fossil fuels are not from dinosaurs. All of your fossil fuels actually come from fossil plants. So the lights are on right now because of plants. It's not freezing cold in your room right now because of plants. So plants are really essential to how we live our daily lives, even if many people think it's the dinosaurs. So plants are pretty much essential for life. There was also mention that how long ago did plants move on to land with the animals? And actually plants had to move on to land before the animals because the animals needed the plants before they could survive on land. So without plants, pretty much life doesn't happen on our planet. We can go back about 600 million years to find our first fossil plants, and see that you guys have a fossil location that's open to the public nearby. You talked about it last week, I know. But I looked up the age of that, and it's what we call Ordovician. So that's about 3 times older than any dinosaur that's out there. And a lot of the plants at that time period just look like little sticks. So I can't even tell you what they actually look like because there's nothing like them on the planet today. In fact, it's not until we get to the Carboniferous period where we start to see some plants that look like what we have today, but we really don't. And that's why it's so hard to put the pieces of the puzzle together, because there's nothing living today that we can actually go out and say, hey, this must be a fossil aster, because there were no fossil asters or anything like, there weren't even fossil conifers around at this time period. So we really try to go in and find the different pieces of the puzzle and figure out what they are and how they fit into everything. Because there's a hypothesis that everything today is somehow related to everything in the past. But so much has changed, it's really hard to figure out what the changes were that got us to today. I mentioned that I travel around the world to look at fossils, and I do actually focus on fossils from the southern hemisphere and specifically Antarctica. And I actually have friends down there right now looking for fossil angiosperms, fossil flowers in Antarctica right as we speak. They hopped onto the continent less than a week ago, and now they're camping down there trying to find fossil flowers to help figure out what was going on during that time period. Something that's very interesting that was a focus of last week was talking about fossil pollen. And fossil pollen is really great because not only is it resistant to destruction, but there's a lot of it. If you think about how much pollen we have out and around today, especially during allergy season when it's really throwing off a lot of pollen, pollen travels a long distance. In fact, some of pollen can actually circle the entire globe. And since that specific pollen covers the entire globe at a specific time, we can use it as what's called an index fossil. So if we find that type of pollen in the rocks, we go, oh, we know that everything in this rock is 70 million years old because the fossil pollen we know is 70 million years old. So even if there are no fossil plants, you might have fossil pollen. So then you say, oh, well, this animal must be 70 million years old because the pollen is 70 million years old. So an index fossil is really a great way to determine how old a time period is. You mentioned radiometric dating last week as well, and everyone knows carbon dating. Carbon dating is great for young stuff. It does not work on fossils. So when we think of carbon dating, we're actually thinking of in the span of human evolution. We have to find different elements to actually figure out the age of the dinosaurs. We can't do carbon dating on dinosaurs because the carbon is gone by the time the dinosaurs have figured out. And I'm drawing a blank, of course, because I get nervous when I have to talk to people. So I took some notes from last week. You mentioned that there's a lot of road cuts through the hill, and you can see the different layers of rocks in those road cuts. I like to liken it to cake layers. So if you have a multi-layered cake, each layer will be a different flavor, just like each layer of the rocks is actually a different time period. So at the bottom, you'll have the oldest, and at the top, you have the youngest. And it's really interesting to see, well, we've got these plants and animals here, we've got these plants and animals here, and we have these plants and animals here. So finding the different locations of the relationship between the plants and animals is very interesting. Also, the nice thing about fossils is they don't die off on you. So if you don't have a green thumb like this person, you can still study fossil plants because you don't have to worry about killing them while you're actually looking at them. And as technology increases, we can actually go back to fossils that were collected 200 years ago and actually look at them again in a whole new light and get even more details out of them. So SEMs have only been around for 50 or 60 years. Micro CT scanning can actually do the internal structure. If you've ever had or seen a CT scan, they pretty much scan your entire body, and you can see them go through the different organs and do a 3D reconstruction of you. Well, we can do that with fossils as well. So now we can see what it actually looked like without having to destroy it in the fossil, without having to destroy it and lose some of the information. I divide up fossil life on this planet into three big categories based on mass extinctions. So currently we are in the period of what I call mammals and flowers. So everywhere you look, most of the animals out there are going to be mammals. The big animals out there are mammals. You have elephants, rhinos, humans, the big cats, giraffes. I'm focused on bison. So we're sort of in the age of mammals right now. And we're also in the age of flowers. Most of the plants that you look at, just about all of the plants you have in your garden are going to be flower plants, not gymnosperms, which are your conifers, or ferns, or even more primitive things like moss. So we're actually in the age of flowering plants and the age of mammals. But if we go back to the extinction of the dinosaurs, so the dinosaurs had their period before the mammals did. There weren't very many angiosperms. There were not a lot of flowers around there. Dinosaurs were not eating flowers. As far as we know, there's some overlap. But during the time of the dinosaurs, there were actually gymnosperms and conifers out there. So it would look completely different. You would have pine trees. You would have cycads you talked about. They're called sago palms at Walmart and Home Depot, but they are not palms. They're actually cycads. A little botany oof there. They're not palms. They're cycads. So it actually should be called the age of the cycads, not the age of the dinosaurs, because the cycads actually lasted longer than the dinosaurs. And the cycads are found around the globe, as opposed to dinosaurs, which were found in different pockets. So we had lots and lots of conifers and lots of dinosaurs. And then before that, we had lots and lots of giant insects, and we had lots and lots of giant ferns. So if we go back to the third large group of plants and animals, we actually see giant insects. Insects as big as a human, and ferns as big as not quite redwood trees, but as tall as the forest that we see out there. So we have huge fern-like plants, we have huge insects, then a mass extinction happened. And then we get huge reptiles, huge dinosaurs, and we get huge conifers, and then a mass extinction happened. And now we have huge mammals and we have huge flowering plants. And that is what's dominating the planet today. Now, what's coming down next, we don't know. So I don't know what type of plants are out there right now that might be taking over the flowering plants. Because the flowering plants are so dominant, you don't know they're on the way out until they're gone. That's the sad thing. Another thing that fossil plants help us do is determine what was the climate like when the plants were alive at this time period. Does it make sense that the climate was like this when the plants were alive? So a lot of the fossil fuels we have in North America, all the coal that we have in Pennsylvania out through Illinois, all of that is from the time of the ferns and the insects. So this is about 300 million years old. And North America at that time was actually at the equator. So you guys, if you went 300 million years ago and looked out your window, you would be in a tropical swamp, because that is where the United States was during the time of when all of the coal was actually living plants. But what happened was we had so much coal and it fell into the swamps, and the insects weren't eating what was in the water. We got more and more and more and more, and it was squished and squished and squished. And the more it's squished, the less of a fossil it becomes, and the more coal it becomes. So what's happened is all of the plants, everything but the carbon that made up the plants was squished out. And that's how we get coal. Now, not all of it happens. Sometimes there's pockets that don't get what we call coalified, and that's where these coal balls come from. One of them wasn't quite a coal ball, but it was from the same time period, was shown as a fossil example last week. And what happens is, it's a fossil compost pile. Fossil compost piles are where you're going to get the most information for fossil plants. But if you look at your compost pile, is everything neatly organized and layered, or is it just sort of a jumbled mishmash of plant material? You're going to have the mishmash of plant material. So what you do is you go in and you try to find the different pieces in your mishmash and figure out how those pieces belong to each other, if they belong to each other. So then you can figure out, what did the plants look like before they became coal. And that's how we know that we had giant ferns during this time period. because these coal balls said, I'm not going to become coal. I'm going to stay the way I am and live through all of history so someone can find me 300 million years in the future, and then everyone can know what the world looked like when I was alive. It's a very selfish thing for a plant to do, but thank goodness for the selfishness of plants for paleobotanists. In fact, coal balls were considered waste. When coal mining was really taking off at the turn of the 20th century, coal miners would just throw coal balls away into a scrap pile. And then paleobotanists would come along and climb all over these scrap piles and take away the fossil coal balls because they were important to us, even though they were waste. We like to recycle things in paleobotany. So one man's waste was our treasure. And we actually have more detail from when plants were alive before they became coal than we do from any other time period in geologic history. So because those plants were selfish and they didn't become coal, and because there's so much coal that we want, we actually find a lot of the plants that were alive before the dinosaurs. So some of it is paleobotanists going out and trying to find fossils. Some of it is paleontologists going out and finding dinosaurs and saying, hey, wait a second, we didn't find dinosaurs, but we found plants. Hey, paleobotanists, here's your fossil plants. And then if we come across dinosaurs, we do go, hey, dino people, we couldn't find plants, but here's the dinosaurs. So paleontology is really a very interconnected, collaborative work. If you did see that Dinosaurs of Antarctica movie, I work with a paleontologist when we go down to Antarctica. And the last time we were both down there, I was finding dinosaurs and he was finding plants. So we actually shared information. So I knew where to go to find the plants and he knew where to go to find the dinosaurs. So we weren't just walking around mountains, staring at the different cake layers, wondering where are the dinosaurs versus the plants. So we all work together to make the whole puzzle piece. But it takes a village to create the whole puzzle piece. I actually don't focus on flowering plants. I don't know a whole lot about flowering plants. I focus on the gymnosperm period. So the time of the dinosaurs is when I actually focus on plants. So a lot of them look like today's conifers, but a lot of them aren't today's conifers. Mary mentioned Glossopteris. That's the plant I do study, and she said it correctly. Good, Mary. I can't compare it to anything. There's nothing on the planet today that looks like a Glossopteris. So I can't say, oh, well, it looks like this, because there's nothing that looks like it. So that actually makes it difficult to figure out what the Glossopteris actually look like, because we find them across the entire southern hemisphere. In fact, it's the Glossopteris fossil that confirmed the idea of continental drift. Everyone thinks it was the dinosaurs that confirmed continental drift. Nope. It was plants that confirmed continental drift, because the same fossil leaf was found across all the southern hemisphere. And then the southern hemisphere puzzle into a single unit. We were able to figure out what continental drift was. In fact, a story from Antarctica, the first British group that made it to the South Pole, they were actually collecting Glossopteris fossils. And on the way back, they had, I don't know how many pounds of weight, but instead of dropping the fossils and trying to get out to the coastline, they actually died. And when they went to recover their bodies, they actually found Glossopteris fossils, which then led to the idea of, oh, look, here's evidence of continental drift. And during that time period, Antarctica, since it's my specialty, I can tell you Antarctica is weird. It's always been at the South Pole. Antarctica has never been at the equator. And yet it's only the last 30 million years that there's been ice on the continent. So there's lots of fossils to find down there. We just haven't found them because they're covered in ice today. And a lot of them, there's volcanoes in Antarctica. And so a lot of the volcanic activity destroys it as well, because you need sedimentary rock to find fossils. And metamorphic volcanoes make igneous and metamorphic rocks. And it is not helpful for paleontologists, which is why you're not going to find fossils in Hawaii. And you're probably not going to find fossils in Iceland. I mean, there's huge volcanic activity going on right now in Iceland. So there's really no sedimentary rocks in Iceland. So you're not going to want to try to find fossils in Iceland. But luckily, the eastern United States is really old. Like I said, it goes 300 million years old, and the fossils around you guys can get up to maybe 600 million years old. So we can go even further back in time with the eastern United States. And then as you move westward, it gets younger and younger. I, in Kansas City, was on the west coast of the United States when the coal was actually alive. So the further west you go, the younger your fossils are going to be. So you don't really find a lot of flowering plant fossils in your area. You're going to find plant fossils from the time of the insects or earlier. So if you're ever looking around, you're going to find those really old fossils. What other things? Mary mentioned that I was pre-med, and then I decided to go into botany pretty much my last semester of college. I literally took the graduate exam instead of the MCAT at the very last minute because I had no idea plants fossilized. I figured, well, everyone studies dinosaurs. We know all about the dinosaurs. There's not a lot left to do. But then I found out dinosaurs aren't the only thing that fossilize. Plants fossilize too, and we have a lot less information about that because they're not animals. And so when I realized that, I'm like, oh, there's a whole career, all sorts of information that we don't know yet about this. And so I changed directions right at that moment. And I had never had a class in botany until I started graduate school. So it's actually fascinating where it only takes one thing to spark your interest that can take you down a pathway that you didn't even know actually existed. And then I found out all about paleontology, paleoecology, how important the plants really are to figure out what life could be like on the planet. Because you can't have animals without the plants, like I said. We do have some national parks that are actually dedicated to fossils. Last week, there was a mention of the Petrified Forest National Park down in Arizona. That is probably the most famous fossil park we have out there. And those trees, they do have living relatives today. But those living relatives are found in South America and Australia. They are not found anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. Hold on to that. They are found in the Northern Hemisphere today because humans brought them from the Southern Hemisphere to the Northern Hemisphere. So you will find them in Florida and on the West Coast. They're called Araucaria. If you ever get Norfolk Island pines from Walmart or Home Depot at Christmas, those are Araucarias. They were brought actually to the Northern Hemisphere by humans, so they're not natural to the Northern Hemisphere today. In the past, they were all over the planet. A lot of the dinosaur work today is actually happening up in the Arctic Circle, and they're finding araucarias that are just like in the Petrified Forest National Park up at the North Pole. So in the past, the North Pole didn't have any ice on it either, and we find dinosaurs and we find plants, huge forests up there as well. The other national park was called Cycad National Monument, and it was in South Dakota because there's lots of dinosaurs in South Dakota too. However, so many people collected the cycads that there are no more cycads there, so they've actually removed the national park status from Cycad National Park. That's why you're not allowed to collect in national parks today, because people would go in and they'd collect all the materials and then it would be lost to science. And we have no idea. We lost a lot of information. Cycads are a big question mark because they're in people's personal collections, or they're in a museum that no one is actually looking at or realizes that they're there. So collaboration between the public and scientists is also very important because amateurs and everyday paleontologists, they're the ones that go out and they actually do the fossil hunting. And then when they find it, if they let the scientists know, then we can actually get information out to everybody. And that is sort of very important collaboration between everybody in order to get this whole picture of what the past looks like.
We do have a couple more minutes, but I also am coming up with some good questions. Very grateful for her to join us today. And so I love you talking about this fossil compost pile, because here at the Civic Garden Center, I teach a lot of people about compost. Yeah. And so I know you said that there's no representative of the Glossopteris.
Right.
But can you describe what it might look like? Like sometimes I see these pictures and I'm like, is it a tree? Was it what can we get close? Yeah.
We know some of them were trees. Some of them may have been bushes. We know they were trees because we have fossil wood. I have been in a couple of fossil forests in Antarctica. So we know some of them had to have been trees because we have the leaves and we have the tree trunks. But some of them may have been little shrubby things. Some of them may have been just little herbaceous things, because there's so many leaves and they're pretty much all Glossopteris leaves. So the Glossopteris must have been various types of plants, but we can't prove it until we find the leaf attached to the stem. And that's really hard to do. We haven't found it. I mean, I've got it doesn't show up very well, but I've got fossil Glossopteris right here from Antarctica. You can see the midrib on some of them. They don't show up very well. This is what's called a leaf mat. So in the fall, when all the leaves fall off the trees, that's what happens. So the nice thing about Glossopteris is it dropped its leaves every year, just like the trees behind you. So then the odds that we could figure out that there are seasons for Glossopteris. So Glossopteris must have had a time of growth and a time of dormancy. And we know that because of these fossil leaf mats. So that was something that we were able to figure out just by looking at how many leaves are found on a single layer of rock. The fossil compost pile is a little bit more tricky because things rot in your compost pile. And so trying to find out what the plant looked like from rotting foliage can get kind of tricky. But I don't know if you can see if this will focus very well or not. Probably not. But what's happening in here is I have a vertical section of this thing. So you see how this is nice and thin and this is nice and thick? So all of those leaf layers are one after another right here in this rock. There's actually a seed in here. I don't know if it's going to focus or not. I have stems in here. I've got roots in here. I've got pretty much a whole plant in here. But because it's all rotting away, it's hard to put it all together. And this is actually one of the permineralizations I mentioned. So what I actually do is I'm going through it cell layer by cell layer. I can actually remove a cell layer at a time. I glue it to a piece of plastic. Yeah, I actually have a piece of plastic. Look at this. I'm prepared and I didn't even know it. So I can actually take a little piece of plastic and pull off a single cell layer of this fossil. I can then put it on a microscope slide and I can look at this under the compound microscope and I can see every single cell that is left in this plant leaf. So what I'm working with this one is this fancy little thing right here that of course you can't see because you can't see it, but it's a stem, but it has funny anatomy. So I'm actually studying the funny anatomy of this stem, and there are leaves attached to this stem. So I can actually put together a piece of the Glossopteris because I've got the leaves attached to a stem. So now I can really complete and confirm what that piece of the puzzle is like. So that's one of the fun things that I get to do with my Antarctic material is figure out what do they look like in a 3D world and what did the inside of them look like. So that is what I'm doing with that specific specimen.
How long do you think it'll take you to analyze all of the things you brought back from your last trip?
Decades.
Yeah.
Decades. I've been to Antarctica 3 times, and we've brought back several tons of fossils. And so we have enough specimens for several career worth of material. The thing with Antarctica is you only get down there every so often. And so when you're down there, you don't have time to pick and choose the pieces that are the best. You pretty much find the fossils, get them all, and then bring them back so that you can then find the best ones at your leisure. Because I had 10 days to find fossils once, and I think 7 of those days, the weather was too bad to actually go out and get fossils. So we didn't have a lot of time to actually get fossils. So when the sun shines, you make your hay, you get your hay, and pray that what you really want to find is going to be in that haystack.
Wow. Oh my gosh, this is so cool. Well, I don't want to take up all of the question time, so I'm going to open it up to anyone who would like to ask Dr. Ryberg a question. So Kayla is on here, and actually Kayla, that was her fossil that I was showing, and you called it a coal ball. So Kayla, do you have any questions about that? Or
I can tell you it's not quite a coal ball.
Okay.
It's actually called a nodule. You said it was from Illinois, so I can tell you it's from Mason Creek. It is the same. It's the same age as coal balls, but it's not coalified. What happened was mud sort of formed a sediment around it, and there's all sorts of little nodules. They look like smooth river rocks in that area. And then if you break them open, you can find fossil plants and fossil insects. So while it's not the petrified material that we have from the coal mines, it is the next best thing. And Mason Creek is one of the places where we have lots and lots of details. Once we get all of our fossils, so we take them to the main base called McMurdo on the coast of Antarctica. And once a year, a ship comes and brings in all the supplies for the following year. And then everything is put on the ship and sent back to the United States. So all of our fossils are put on a giant tanker ship. They are shipped across the Pacific Ocean up to LA. They're put on a truck in LA, and then they come to Kansas City. So they don't get to fly. They have to take the freighter, which takes months. So we collect in December, but we won't see them until May at the earliest.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ryberg, for your time, for your willingness to share your passion and inspire that next generation of paleobotanists. Do you have any last little bits of advice that you would leave for someone that wants to join the field?
So for future budding paleontologists, any paleontologist, I always thought dinosaurs were all found and done, but we're finding new ways to study fossils. So don't think that we know everything about like a T-Rex or a Brontosaurus. We're finding new ways to study them. And so there will always be work for a paleontologist out there. To succeed, you need to take math and science when you're in school. Any science you're going to go into, take as much math and as science because it will help you out so much when you're studying for fossils. So math and the STEM stuff is very important to succeed as a paleontologist, and there will always be more work to do when it comes to studying fossils and figuring out that puzzle from the past.